I just spent a whole lot of time talking to this computer phone screen thing, and it wasn't recording. So I'm going to do a shorter version. I have decided to finally do my life's desire and write children's book with a Christian basis. This is my thesis, my dissertation on the origins, the theological and anthropological origins of Bigfoot. Based on this, I am doing this. These are children's books, little bitty tiny books that children can read. Doesn't take a lot of time. Good enough to read before bed. Not too long. Maybe half of it before bed. This is the first one. It is the opening story, and it essentially lays the foundation of this. A lot of the stuff in this story has to do with my background, places that I've been, things that I've done, people I've talked to. All the rest of it is stuff sourced from the internet, either by me searching it or AI helping me to search it, working as my assistant. I'm a minute in. Let's get to reading, because I think these books are going to be so much fun for you and your kids. They're from a Christian viewpoint and worldview, and these are written about Bigfoot. So let's start to read. The Biblical Wildman. From Hollers to Holy Word. Book 1. Chapter 1. From Hollers to Holy Word. Ephriam Von Bartholomew Bradshaw's story began with absence. His parents divorced when he was 3, and his mother slipped into the shadows of memory. His father worked long shifts to keep food on the table, and so most afternoons, Ephraim came home from school to the watch of a babysitter. But the babysitter's back was no match for his restless spirit. The moment her eyes turned away, Ephraim disappeared into the trees. In the middle of the city, there was a small patch of wilderness. A creek winding through rocks, oaks, maples leaning over narrow paths. The air thick with moss and mystery. To most, it was a forgotten lot. To Ephraim, it was a kingdom. There he caught crawdads under stones, watched minnows flash silver in the water, and learned the quiet ways of frogs, foxes, and owls. Yet always, even as a child, he felt something else in those woods, a presence, as if eyes watched from the shadows just out of reach. On Sundays, his father took him to church. Sometimes it was a white clapboard chapel with hymns echoing against wood walls. Sometimes a red brick sanctuary with stained glass. Sometimes a tent meeting with sawdust on the ground. The voices of the preachers were all different. Some shouted, some whispered, some wept. But their message rang the same. Search the scriptures for yourself. Don't just take our word for it. The Spirit of God will teach you. Those words lodged in Ephraim's heart. As he grew, he searched. He read the prophets. He read Revelation's visions. He read Daniel's strange stories of beasts and kingdom. One day he reached Daniel 4, the story of proud King Nebuchadnezzar. The king had walked in arrogance, and God had struck him with judgment. Let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. Ephraim stopped. He read it again. The king had been given the heart of a beast. For 7 years his hair grew thick and long like eagle's feathers, his nails like bird's claws. He ate grass like an ox and lived under the dew of heaven. Ephraim reached for his sketchbook. He drew what he saw in his mind. Hair growing where hair should be, but thicker, hundreds of times thicker, until it overlapped like feathers, dense yet light, covering his body, nails stretched long, not curling like a beast's paw, but sharp, proportioned like talons. A man, but no longer like a man. He stared at the page. It looked almost exactly like the descriptions he had heard. whispered about the Sasquatch and the Bigfoot of the mountains. A thought stirred. What if these wild men are not monsters? What if they are men, judged by God, humbled for a time, just as Nebuchadnezzar was? And then another thought came. A memory from church. Years later, when he would sit in a study about Judas, he would hear how Judas repented in guilt, but fell into despair without hope. Nebuchadnezzar, though, endured his 7 years until God restored him, lifting him back to his throne. 2 men, 2 terrible falls, one ended in despair, the other in mercy. The lesson was clear, even to young Ephraim. God is a God of judgment, but also a God of mercy. He humbles, but he restores. That day, Ephraim's boyhood wonder turned into a lifelong quest. He would search for the wild men of the world, not to prove myths, but to prove the mercy and judgment of God who rules over all. His first target would be in the Appalachian Mountains, where folks whispered of a creature they called the wood booger. Chapter 2, The Beast's Heart. Ephraim's childhood sketches of Nebuchadnezzar had never left him. He could see the king's hair in his mind, grown long and layered like feathers, so thick it seemed to cloak him. He could see the nails, sharp as talons, yet still the nails of a man. The image haunted him even as he grew into adulthood. By the time he entered college, Ephraim had become a serious student of the Bible. As at his Christian school in Virginia, he pored over Daniel and Revelation with the same hunger he once brought to catching minnows in Kentucky creeks. One verse burned brighter than the rest. Daniel 4:16. Let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. A beast's heart, not a new body, not a hybrid. A man's form remained, but the inner spirit, the desires, the mind, the dignity was humbled until it reflected in animals. And it was for a set time, 7 years exactly, not 1 year too few, not 1 too many. Ephraim wrote in his journal, "This is not random. The judgment is measured. God himself sets the term. And when the 7 years are complete, Nebuchadnezzar is restored. Judgment has a limit. Mercy has no limit." As he studied prophecy, Ephraim noticed a pattern. Daniel spoke of beasts that represented kingdoms. Revelation revealed beasts that embodied empires of pride and blasphemy. And yet, hidden among these visions, there was one man, a single king, who himself was turned into a beast, only to be lifted again when he confessed that the Most High rules. The thought struck like thunder. Could all the wild men legends be echoes of this same truth? Around campfires in the Appalachian hills, people whispered about the wood booger. In the Pacific Northwest, they spoke of Sasquatch. In other lands, there were Yetis, Yowies, and countless others. Always men, always hairy, always between the worlds of beast and human. They are not myths, they are judgments. Each is a man given the heart of a beast for a time. Some live until they are restored, like Nebuchadnezzar. Some die before the years are done, slain by men who never knew what they were seeing. But all are testimonies. God humbles the proud and lifts up whom he will. He thought too of Judas. Judas had stumbled into sin and confessed, "I have betrayed innocent blood." But unlike Nebuchadnezzar, Judas found no appointed end to his humiliation. His despair swallowed him whole. One man was restored to a throne, the other ended in ruin. The difference was not in the sin, but in the mercy of God. Nebuchadnezzar's term of judgment was fixed, 7 years. And at the end, he lifted his eyes and was restored. Ephraim underlined Daniel 4:34 and read, "And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned to me." It became his guiding text. The Most High sets the times. He gives kingdoms to whom he will, and he writes lessons of repentance even into the forest of the world, where wild men walk for a season under heaven's judgment. Chapter 3. Names in the margins. Ephraim's Bible was lined with notes, verses underlined in red, arrows pointing from Daniel to Revelation, sketches in the margin that looked like half like kings, half like beasts. But the page that mattered most was a scrap of paper folded into the back. On it he had begun a list of names. It started simple: Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Wood Booger. These were the names he heard most often in the hills and valleys of America. But as his studies deepened, he discovered more. A professor mentioned the Yeti of Tibet. A missionary friend spoke of the Yowie of Australia. Old anthropology text recorded the Agagwe of Africa, the Almas of Mongolia, the Mapinguari of the Amazon. The list grew until the page looked like a patchwork map of the world. North America: Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Skunk Ape, Wendigo, Mongolian Monster, Wood Booger, Hairy Man. South America: Mapinguari, Marikoksi, Garupira. Europe: Wild Man, Woodwoos, Troll. Asia: Yeti, Almas, Orange Pandik. Africa: Agagwe, Kibokwe, Shida Yamutu. Oceania: Yowie, Mohalman, Mayero. Tornit in the Arctic, Bushman, Adlet. Ephraim started at the list. So many names, so many stories, but everyone carried the same feature: tall, hairy, human-like, feared and pitied. It was as if every continent remembered the same truth but told it in a different tongue. At night, he sketched. He drew Nebuchadnezzar again, hair grown long like feathers, nails sharp like talons. Then beside him, he drew a wood booger, as described in Virginia, a Yeti from the Tibetan accounts, Mapinguari from the Amazon. He noticed how easily the images overlapped. The differences were small. The essence was the same. If one is true, all may be true. Even if one story is real, then the rest are echoes of the same judgment. The Most High has written this lesson into every land. Pride leads to a beast's heart, but repentance leads to mercy. Sometimes his fellow students laughed at his obsession. "You're never gonna prove Bigfoot with a Bible verse," they said, but Ephraim was unmoved. He wasn't trying to prove myths. He was tracing the character of God. And in his prayers, the mission became clearer. He must go. He must follow the trail from the mountains of Virginia to the farthest corners of the earth, gathering stories, recording names, testing them all against Daniel's truth. He packed a fresh journal, ink and pen, and his well-worn Bible. On the first page he copied his anchor verse: "The Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will." Below it he wrote, "The search for the Biblical Wildman begins." And with that, his eyes turned toward Virginia, where the locals whispered of a creature that stole food from gardens and left footprints in the hills. They called it the Wood Booger. Chapter 4. Into Wood Booger country. The train wound its way through the Appalachian hills, and Ephraim pressed his forehead to the window. The mountains of Virginia rolled out in green ridges, mist curling in the valleys like smoke from hidden fires. He felt at home already. This was the kind of country where a man could vanish into the trees. In his pack rested two things above all else: his Bible and his journal. The Bible was marked and worn, Daniel 4 nearly memorized. The journal was fresh and with only a single sentence on the opening page: "The search for the Biblical Wildman begins." When the train stopped in Norton, Virginia, Ephraim stepped down into a town alive with color and sound. It was the weekend of the annual Wood Booger Festival. Booths lined the square selling fried pies, sweet teas, shirts printed with hairy silhouettes. Children in oversized costumes chased each other, their foam feet slapping the pavement. Laughter echoed against the mountainsides. But Ephraim wasn't here for food or fun. He scanned the crowd for faces that carried stories. Not the tourists, but the locals, the ones who remembered. He found one near the edge of the festival, an old man in overalls, rocking on the porch with a stem of grass between his teeth. His eyes were sharp, steady, the eyes of someone who'd seen more than he said. Ephraim introduced himself. "Sir, I'm studying the Wood Booger. Do you know anything about him?" The old man spat in the dirt and nodded. "Boy, the Wood Booger's been here longer than this town. My granddaddy saw him near Flag Rock. Said he weren't no bear. Walked upright, taller than a man, hair covering him head to toe, eyes that'll chill you straight through. You don't forget eyes like that." Ephraim wrote quickly in his journal. The words matched Daniel's image too closely to ignore. A man covered in hair like feathers, still with human eyes that carried understanding. As the festival wound down that evening, Ephraim walked the trail toward Flag Rock Sanctuary, where locals claimed the Wood Booger still roamed. The trees whispered overhead, the air heavy with cicadas and the smell of pine. And there, in the mud beside the path, he saw it. A footprint. Large, deep, too wide for a boot, too human for a bear. His heart pounded. He traced the outline with his finger, then opened his Bible by lantern light. The page fell again to Daniel 4. His hair was grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. Ephraim prayed aloud, "Lord, if this is judgment, let me see your mercy written in it. Teach me what these hills already know." The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a cry echoed through the holler, long, low, and mournful. Ephraim felt the sound in his chest. It was not just an animal. It was something more. And he knew the search had truly begun. Chapter 5. Night in the Holler. The forest closed in quickly after sunset. By the time Ephraim pitched his small tent beneath a stand of pines, the sky was ink black, and the moon shone like a silver coin. The day's laughter from the Wood Booger Festival felt far away now, replaced by the solemn hush of the hills. He built a small fire, just enough to keep back the chill, and sat with his Bible in his lap. His lantern glowed on the pages of Daniel, the words alive in the firelight. "And 7 times shall pass over him, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men." Ephraim leaned back against a log, and for a moment he was a boy again, slipping past his babysitter, ducking into the tiny wilderness in the middle of the city. Back then, the woods were his secret sanctuary. Now the mountains were his cathedral. Yet the same feeling lingered, that he was not alone. The night was restless. Owls called. Something rustled through the underbrush. At one point, a branch snapped like a gunshot, and Ephraim's hand went for his lantern. He scanned the tree line, his heart hammering, but saw nothing. only the shifting shadows of leaves in the moonlight. Fear rose like a tide. What if the wood booger came near? What if the stories were more than stories? He turned quickly to his Bible and whispered the words in Psalms 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The word steadied him. Fear bent its knee to faith. Still the night pressed on. Once from deep in the holler came a cry, long, low, mournful. It wasn't the bark of a fox or the yip of a coyote. It was something else, something that pulled at the edge of memory. Ephraim picked up his journal and wrote by the firelight. The cry tonight sounded less like a beast and more like a man. If the wood booger lives, perhaps he is a living Nebuchadnezzar's judgment. He is living Nebuchadnezzar's judgment. Not destroyed, but humbled. Not monster, but man. He closed his book, prayed for courage, and lay down with his lantern flickering beside him. The last thing he saw before sleep was the glow of Daniel's words. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven. When his eyes closed, the hills seemed to breathe, and the wind through the trees whispered a question. Will you trust the God who rules, even in the dark? Chapter 6, Signs in the Morning. Ephraim woke to birdsong and the thin gray light of dawn. The fire had burned down to embers, but the words of Daniel still rested in his heart. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and listened. The forest was alive again, not with mournful cries, but with the chatter of wrens and the drumming of woodpeckers. He packed his journal and Bible, slung his bag over his shoulder, and set off along the trail near Flag Rock. The mountain air was sharp, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. He walked slowly, scanning the ground and the trees the way he had as a boy, searching for crawdads under rocks. Then he saw it. On the side of the tree, about shoulder height, there were 3 deep grooves, claw marks, long and clean, carved into the bark. They weren't the kind a bear would leave, with wide swipes. They were straighter, narrower, more almost human in proportion, but far too long. He leaned close. In the rough edge of the bark, a few coarse strands of hair clung. He plucked one gently, turning it into the morning light. It was long, dark, and surprisingly fine like a human's, yet thicker, heavier. His heart pounded. He pulled out his journal and sketched the tree, the claw marks, and the hair. Then, with care, he taped the strand to the page beside his drawing. Lord, he whispered, if this is truly the echo of your judgment, let me learn what you are teaching. He sat on a rock, opened his Bible, and turned again to Daniel 4. His eyes fell on verse 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. Ephraim underlined it. Judgment and mercy side by side. The hair in his hand was not proof for the world, but it was enough for him. A reminder that God who humbled kings could humble any man. And he closed his Bible. The wind carried a faint sound from deeper in the woods. It wasn't the cry of the night before. Something softer, like a sigh, almost sorrowful, almost human. Ephraim stood and prayed aloud. If there's a man behind this judgment, God, let him find mercy. Let him look up to heaven as Nebuchadnezzar did. With that, he tightened his pack and stepped further down the trail, deeper into wood booger country. The quest was longer than just in his mind. It was no longer just in his mind. It was under his feet. Chapter 7. Pride in the pulpit. Prince in the dust. By late morning, Ephraim came down from Flag Rock with a strand of hair taped in his journal and a prayer still on his lips. The festival streets were quieter now. Vendors swept sawdust from beneath their booths. Children chased each other with paper crowns and wooden slingshots. Somewhere a hymn leaked from an open church window, an old tune he knew by heart. The door stood ajar. A small congregation had gathered for a weekday service. Work boots, denim jackets, a few bowed gray heads. No stage lights, no microphones, just worn pews and a pulpit scuffed by 100 Bibles. Ephraim slipped into the back row. The mountain preacher was a lean man with a voice like cedar, soft when he prayed, iron when he read. He turned to Daniel 4 and let the words do the heavy work. Let his heart be changed from a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, till thou knowest that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men. The preacher shut his Bible halfway and looked across the room. Pride makes a beast of any man, he said, not shouting, just pleading, stating a fact. But mercy has a longer arm than judgment. Lift your eyes, and understanding returns. Ephraim felt the sentence lay across his shoulders like a mantle. After the benediction, he waited near the pulpit. The preacher noticed the journal and smiled. You're not from around here. No, sir. I'm following a line I first saw in Daniel, looking for what the hills remember. You'll find two things in these hollers, the preacher said. Stories and mirrors. Stories about what folks claim to have seen. Mirrors for what God wants us to see in ourselves. He tapped Daniel with a rough finger. This chapter will keep you from sneering at the wild and from despairing over the fallen. Both are traps. Outside, the preacher walked with him to the steps. You'll want Flag Rock at dusk, he said. But if you go down the old logging road, mind the camps. Some men love to argue more than listen. If you meet one with a rifle and a laugh that never reaches his eyes, pray before you answer. Ephraim wrote the phrases as soon as he stepped out onto the sidewalk. Pride makes a beast of any man. Mercy has a longer arm than judgment. The afternoon thinned into light and shadow. He ate a sandwich from a diner where the waitress called everyone hun, then followed the preacher's directions toward the logging road. The woods accepted him the way they accept weather, without fuss, with quiet. Half a mile in, he found a place where the ground dipped and held yesterday's rain. The mud kept its secrets poorly. A print, clearer than the one beside the trail, lay impressed at the edge of the puddle. It was long and human in outline, but wider at the ball, the toes splayed slightly, the depth telling of weight beyond an ordinary man's. He knelt and studied the edges. No boot lug, no claw crescents, just the unmistakable arrangement of toes, the push-off drag where the foot had risen. He laid 2 fingers along the span for measurement, then opened the journal. Second print. Toe spread suggests unshod foot of unusual width. Depth deeper than mine by half. Human architecture, inhuman scale. He stood and looked in the trees. The hush felt attentive, not empty. If this is judgment, he murmured, let your mercy be close. The road bent toward a narrow hollow. Locals call it a holler, a word that fit the shape of the sound there. He saw other signs, a sapling bent and twisted shoulder high, a tree where the bark was scraped in long, narrow strokes, a clump of coarse hair snagged in a fork of a branch, darker than the strand from morning, almost auburn in the sun. He folded it into a blank envelope and tapped it beside the drawing on the next page, taped it. He sat on a fallen log and read again, not as a scholar parsing grammar, but as a man needing bread. And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me. He lingered on returned. Judgment had an end. Mercy had a door. Distant voices drifted up the road, men talking. The metallic clink of a camp stove, laughter too sharp. Ephraim closed his Bible, cinched his pack, and prayed the preacher's prayer over his own heart. Keep me from sneering from despair. As the sun leaned toward the ridges, he turned back toward town to refill water and pick up a new pencil. At the church, he found the preacher locking the door. Did the woods speak? The preacher asked. They whispered, Ephraim said, and they kept one cry for the night. The preacher nodded toward the holler. The night will introduce you to somebody. If it's a beast, show no fear. If it's a man, show no contempt. He paused. And if it's a man with a rifle in an argument, show no hurry. Ephraim smiled despite the chill that rang along his arms. He walked to his cabin, packed for the evening, lantern, journal, Bible, a coil of thin rope, and patience, and headed toward the logging road as the first bats began to cut the air. The last line he wrote before the light went thin was not theory. The last line he wrote before the night went thin, should be while thin, was not theory, but petition. Most High, rule in these hills as you ruled in Babylon. If pride makes a beast, let mercy make him a man again. The road narrowed, the trees drew close, and the holler waited in its own kind of breath. Somewhere ahead, a single voice, human or otherwise, would test him. He stepped into the dusk. Chapter 8, The Skeptic in the Holler. That evening, Ephraim hiked down to the edge of town where the hills dipped into the narrow holler. Locals said hunters sometimes camped there before going up toward Flag Rock. Sure enough, he found a small fire burning with a man sitting beside it, rifle leaning against its log. A man looked up with a grin that had no warmth. You must be that stranger asking about the wood bugger. Word travels fast around here. Ephraim nodded politely. I'm studying the stories, hoping to learn the truth. The hunter chuckled and spat into the fire. Truth is, it's all hogwash. Just tales folks tell to scare kids and sell t-shirts at the festival. You're wasting your time. Ephraim sat down on a rock nearby. And yet people keep seeing something. They've been telling these stories for generations. Stories, the hunter repeated, shaking his head. I've been hunting these woods 30 years. Bears, deer, bobcats. I've seen them all. Never seen no man beast. If there was one, I'd have shot it by now and mounted its hide. Ephraim felt a fire rise in his chest. Not anger, but conviction. He opened his Bible and held it to the firelight. The book of Daniel says a king once lived as a beast for 7 years. Hair like feathers, nails like claws. God humbled him until he lifted his eyes to heaven. I believe these stories are echoes of that truth. The hunter smirked. You really think God turns men into monsters? Not monsters, Ephraim said firmly. Men under judgment. Men who need mercy, just like all of us. For a moment the fire cracked. The woods whispered in the silence. The hunter shifted, his grin fading just a little. He poked the embers with the stick. Well, preacher boy, maybe you're right. Or maybe you're chasing ghosts. Either way, the woods will tell you what they want. He leaned back, pulled his hat low, and ended the talk. But Ephraim stayed a while longer, staring into the flame. He prayed silently. Lord, let me be faithful to your word even when others mock. Let me see what you want me to see. The cry of the barred owl echoed through the holler, sharp and sudden. The hunter didn't stir, but Ephraim shivered, not from fear, from the reminder that the wilderness still held his secrets. Chapter 9. The Journey Ahead. Ephraim rose early his last morning in Norton. The mist hung low over the mountains, curling through the hollers like a ghost. He sat on the porch of his cabin, with his Bible on his lap and his journal open beside him. He flipped through the pages he had filled in just a few days. The footprint by the trail, too human for a bear. The claw marks carved into bark with the strand of dark hair still taped in place. The old man's words about the eyes that looked right through you. The mountain preacher's warning, pride makes a beast of any man. The hunter's scoff at the stories, sharp as the crack of his rifle. Each note was another piece of the pattern. Every witness, every sign pointed back to Daniel's truth. The Most High humbles the proud, and his judgment is real. Yet mercy waits at the end of judgment, if only a man will lift his eyes to heaven. Ephraim dipped his pen and wrote across the bottom of the page. The wood booger is no monster. He is a parable. God's judgment written into the mountains. His mercy still waiting in the hills. He closed his journal and looked over the ridges. The Appalachian stretched far beyond Norton, running south toward warmer air and wider swamps. He had overheard whispers at the festival. Travelers from Florida talked about a hairy wild man in the Everglades. They called it the skunk ape. Ephraim smiled. Another name for his growing list. Another trail to follow. He packed his bag carefully, Bible, journal, compass, sketches. As he stepped on to the road out of town, the sun broke through the midst, and Daniel's words returned to him once more. The Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The God who ruled in Babylon still ruled in Virginia, and he would rule in the swamps of Florida, and in every land where men whispered of wild ones in the shadows. The journey had only begun.